Hi guys, Lisa here from astrologysphere.com. I hope you had a wonderful Christmas season and a happy new year. So we're into January 2020 and that means eclipse season. Now, as we know, a new eclipse season got underway on December the 26th with the solar eclipse in Capricorn. Now, of course, there's the follow-up lunar eclipse in Cancer. And although I have done a video that looks at the kind of macro trends and how these eclipses fit into the overall picture, particularly with regards to the Saturn and Pluto conjunction, which happens to after the lunar eclipse, I thought it might be a good idea to, instead of doing my usual full moon forecast, to have a look at the chart for the upcoming lunar eclipse in Cancer, just to have a look at the main trends and energies that are going to be around this particular eclipse.
So what we're going to do now is have a closer look at the energies of the January lunar eclipse using the astrology chart. So when it comes to identifying the signatures of a particular eclipse, we need to look at a couple of things that will tell us about the key trends and cosmic energies at play between the time of the eclipse and the waning moon cycle that takes us into the second half of January. So the first thing is the sign or signs in which the eclipse takes place. The second thing is the degree in which it occurs, because this will tell us about the Sabian symbol. And then the third thing are the planetary energies ignited as a result of aspects between planets and the luminaries at the time of the eclipse. And these will often augment or amplify certain energies, or perhaps block or interfere with others. But they give us another layer to the picture and help to explain the unique energy surrounding any particular eclipse. So the lunar eclipse occurs in the sign of Cancer, which means that the moon will be highly dignified at the time, because the moon naturally rules the sign of Cancer. So everything Cancerian and lunar will be emphasized at this time. It could also be a very emotional time. Full moons generally are, and lunar eclipses always occur at the full moon. So it's worth just bearing in mind that you might need some time for yourself, that you might feel more triggered than usual. You could react or overreact, or you just might need some time on your own to deal with things that come up at this time that are leavovers from the previous eclipse cycle. So this eclipse will close out the eclipse cycle which began in July of 2019. So any issues or outstanding matters left over from that particular eclipse cycle, which lasted between July and December of 2019, need to be released, integrated, processed, and basically buried now, so that we can move fully into the energy of the new eclipse cycle, which began on the 26th of December 2019 and will last until June of 2020. So before we get on to the actual chart relating to the eclipse, it's worth just pointing out that I have done some eclipse forecasts for members. These break down the eclipse trends for each zodiac sign individually. I currently offer them only for site members, and they're not being made available in the public domain. So if you would like to have access to those, then please consider subscribing. It's absolutely free to do so, and you just have to go to astrologysphere.com/subscribe and join up. Members generally get access to exclusive information and forecasts. So I send out a twice monthly newsletter with my lunar phase forecasts on it to members, and I also give them access to my eclipse library, which dates back about 15 years. So that can be quite useful if you are in astrology, in the game of astrology yourself, or if you are some kind of forecaster. So here we have the astrological chart for the lunar eclipse on the 10th of January. So this can tell us a number of things immediately. The first thing is the signs in which the eclipse occurs. So in this case, the moon is in Cancer and the sun is in Capricorn. And that's because lunar eclipses happen at the full moon when the sun and moon are in opposition or on opposite sides of the earth. Now, the idea of opposition is highlighted even more by this particular eclipse, and that's because the sun is surrounded by a stellium of planets in Capricorn, including Jupiter, Mercury, Saturn and Pluto. And of course Saturn and Pluto will perfect their conjunction in 2 days after this particular eclipse. So the theme of harmonizing or balancing opposites is very strong at this particular eclipse. The second thing to say about this chart is that the moon is at the 21st degree of Cancer, and this resonates with another Cancer eclipse that happened back in July of 2018, a solar eclipse. And this is quite unusual. We don't often have two eclipses so close together that happen in exactly the same degree. So we're going to have a look at the chart for that eclipse because I think it pertains to an extent to things that could come up at this time. The second thing is that Uranus will be stationing. You can see that it's stationing at 2.5 degrees of Taurus in this particular chart. And again, this is fascinating because at the time of the solar eclipse in Cancer back in July of 2018, Uranus was at the exact same degree. It was also in the second sort of 2 degrees of Taurus. So again, that points us back to that particular eclipse. So we're definitely going to have a look at that in more detail. Suffice to say that this eclipse will be closing out the cycle that began in July of 2019, so for many reasons it could be a time when you feel quite emotional and where you could get triggered, and it's a good idea to just take some time out, perhaps away from others, so that you can process whatever comes up rather than simply overreact or kind of react from an unconscious place, because it's very likely that things could, as I say, come up that are triggering. So let's have a closer look at the eclipse themes that are generated as a result of the moon being in Cancer at the time of the eclipse. So Cancer predominantly is about family, belonging, the past, the unconscious, the way that we nourish ourselves, the way that we take care of others and are taken care of by others. So in this sense, it can be about childhood, but also about motherhood, or simply how we nurture ourselves or nurture others. So self-care on the one hand, but also how we give love and show love to others. Another way that Cancer can play out is in terms of unconscious patterns or behavior that has developed as a result of early conditioning, and this often occurs within the family unit at a very young age. And of course, it's possible that many of us have been working to release unconscious patterns and toxic behavior that have been highlighted for us as a result of the solar eclipse that happened in July of 2019. The other thing that Cancer rules is the idea of home and belonging. So it's possible at this time that you may decide to relocate, to move home, to find perhaps you've been trying to sell your property and it finally sells. So that's another way that this could come up. Cancer is also to do with security and safety. So this can manifest in a literal or in a much more figurative sense. So on the one hand, it could be about home security. On the other hand, it could be about emotional security. So do you feel safe around loved ones? Do you trust them? Or has trust been violated, and has that become a problem in terms of certain dynamics within relationships? Other ways that Cancer can manifest are things like ancestral patterns, genetic inheritances, family history, so it could be skeletons in the closet, it could just be a secret in the family, or a kind of a behavior that nobody wanted to talk about, or an event such as a death that has taken a while to process. These are all things that could potentially come up at the full moon in Cancer, at this time. But generally speaking, you'll probably be aware of how the Cancer theme is working for you, because it will be something that will have been brought to your attention by the solar eclipse back in July of 2019. So really what you're doing now is processing, integrating, kind of putting the final touches onto whatever it is that you've been working on in order to move on to another phase of your life. So as I was saying earlier, one of the major themes of this particular eclipse is the balancing and harmonization of opposites. And these, in this particular eclipse, these are represented by both the Sun and Moon and by the signs of Cancer and Capricorn. Now what's really interesting is that at this particular eclipse we've got two planets that are both in their natural signs. On the one hand we've got the Moon in Cancer, and so Cancer is naturally ruled by the Moon. This is her natural domicile. And then on the other hand we've got Saturn in Capricorn, which is again the natural planetary ruler of that particular sign. So this is really sort of emphasizing the polarity between Cancer and Capricorn. And this is interesting for a number of reasons. These particular signs represent not just the archetypal mother and father figures, but also the private and the public spheres of life. So on the one hand you've got home, and then you've got, on the other hand, you've got work, represented by Capricorn. So it could be that these two, at this time, you have to try and balance out these two sides of your life. Then the other thing is that the Sun and the Moon will be in opposition, which happens, as I said, at every full moon. But the Sun and the Moon, like the Moon and Saturn, are considered to be almost archetypally set at opposite ends of the symbolic spectrum when it comes to astrological symbolism. So the Sun and the Moon represent day and night, and together they rule planetary sect. But then they also rule things like the Sun is considered to have to do with the spirit and with higher thinking, and then on the other hand the Moon is thought to rule emotions, the unconscious, and sort of instinctual patterns of behavior that come up. They're almost knee-jerk reactions or habits. So they can be good, they can be bad. So those two things might need to be balanced out at this time. What's fascinating for me is how Mercury is very close to the Sun at the time of the eclipse, and Mercury is this sort of planetary go-between par excellence within astrology. So it's really strongly associated with the idea of marriage, the marriage of opposites. And we saw this very strongly at the last full moon that we had back in December of 2019. So you might want to revisit my forecast on that particular full moon, because I think you might find it interesting that the whole sort of theme of the liminality of Mercury and how it helps to balance out opposites. So the other way to consider this is that on the collective level, there's also a need to rebalance masculine and feminine energies. And so we could have events happening out in the world that kind of throw into stark contrast patriarchal patterns and power relationships on one hand, and then the rise of the sacred feminine on the other. Of course, you might also want to talk about the need to balance the divine masculine and feminine within yourself. That's another way that this could work. And of course, given that Cancer is about family dynamics, this could also play out in terms of a need to reconcile the two parts of yourself identified with your father on one hand and your mother on the other. So those are just some of the ways that the theme of balancing and reconciling opposites may play out at this time. The key thing to remember, though, is that duality or separation is actually an illusion, that these two opposite signs actually have a lot in common, that they sit on almost two poles of a continuum. And so the best way to harmonize and to get rid of any tension between these two opposites is to find the commonalities or the middle ground, and this is what Mercury is so fantastic at doing. So just something to think about going into this particular energy. So the other thing that this eclipse will do is activate the Saturn-Pluto conjunction, probably on a personal level. I think on a collective level we've been feeling it for quite some time now. So it's fair to say that when it comes to the Saturn-Pluto cycle, that what this conjunction represents is the beginning of a new era. So that the last 35-year cycle was began back in 1982, when Saturn and Pluto came together in Libra, but that is now closed out. So this conjunction is now beginning the new phase, because each cycle basically goes through similar waxing and waning to the moon. So you get the first conjunction, then you get the waxing square, then you go to the opposition, then you go to the waning square, and then back to the conjunction. So that's just something to bear in mind. Basically, we need to consider Saturn and Pluto in terms of what they represent, not just for ourselves, and for this you need to have a look at where Saturn and Pluto sit in your chart, what signs they're in, and what houses they rule. But we also need to remember that these two planets are essentially social. So Saturn is considered to be one of the social planets. It is concerned with things like social convention, with outward respectability, and with positions of authority. And then Pluto is considered to be a transpersonal planet, so it's really concerned with shadow energy, with the unconscious, with what's hidden, and kind of underworld themes. So it's possible that at this time there may be a revelation of some kind, either within your own psyche or within society as a whole, which reveals hidden power within everyday structures that basically underpin everyday and kind of earthly reality. So one of the ways that this could manifest in the collective is that we may see the idea of social control kind of coming to the fore, particularly through hidden power structures within the online arena, because that's become almost an everyday system that we use on a regular basis. And here we just have to think about people like Tristan Harris and his lobbying of Silicon Valley in terms of the way that business models are currently constructed within things like social media, and his argument that they are open to manipulation or exploitation for either commercial reasons or political reasons. So we may become more aware of how big corporations and governments actually emotionally manipulate users of social media for either monetary or political gain. But then we also have to consider the fact that Saturn and Pluto, when they come together in a conjunction, that a conjunction is actually a neutral aspect, so it could also manifest in a positive way. So here we could see, for example, the rise of all discussions around things like corporate social responsibility, having to take a sort of accountability for actions in the past. Say, for example, because of criminal activity that was hidden, say there was dodgy accounting, or there might have been an environmental disaster that was covered up, or it could relate to given the idea that we're balancing our patriarchal and matriarchal energies here, that we could see the rise of women in positions of power, within politics, within big business, or we could see the advent of rules and regulations that are designed to curb the greed and corruption that Pluto has been helping to uncover since it went into Capricorn back in 2008. So this of course gives us instant resonances of the global financial crisis, and of course many people are still very angry about how little accountability was actually taken by those that were responsible for the crash. So it could be that again we see developments on that score happening at this time. So what is super interesting about this particular eclipse is that it carries a lot of similar signatures to the eclipse that we had in July of 2018. It was a solar eclipse in Cancer. Why do I say that? Well, for one thing, this particular eclipse happens in the same degree, so it carries the same Sabian symbol energy as the January 10 eclipse, which is really, really interesting. It's very seldom that you have eclipses so close together that share the same degree, that happen in the same degree. And I think that what we could see there is issues arising that were quite prevalent then. So things around emotional drama, attention-seeking behavior, particularly within families or small groups, the issue of narcissism. That's been kind of constellating, I think, quite a lot during the last 6-month cycle, eclipse cycle. So that's one thing to bear in mind. The second thing is that Pluto energy will be strong in both eclipses. So in the July 2018 solar eclipse, Pluto was opposing the Sun and Moon. In this particular lunar eclipse, we've got Pluto opposing the Moon, but sort of working with the Sun, if you like. So male energies versus female energies being highlighted quite strongly. And I think we could see this expressed through catharsis, revelations, power struggles, all the idea of having to deal with stuff that isn't particularly pleasant or that makes people feel uncomfortable. Also death and rebirth energy, which again will echo the Saturn-Pluto conjunction. That's also another way that this could be expressed. And then, of course, the third similarity with July 2018 is the fact that Uranus, which has been retrograde for the last couple of months, has actually got back to the point where it was at the time of the July 2018 solar eclipse. So this is 2 degrees of Taurus, and it's about to station. It will station at the full moon and then go direct. So that's really interesting. We're going to kind of look at that in a little bit more detail. So here's the chart of the solar eclipse that happened back in July of 2018. Now, as I say, this particular eclipse is fascinating for a number of reasons. First of all, it happened between eclipses. So it occurred in July in the sign of Cancer, but then a month later there was another solar eclipse in Leo. So the energy of this particular eclipse was almost intercepted. It only really lasted a month as opposed to the usual 6 months. So that's one way that it was very interesting. The second thing is that it happened very close to the South Node. So it wasn't actually visible to a lot of people because it happened in Antarctica and there isn't really a lot of land mass around there. So it was almost like a secret or a kind of ghost eclipse. And then the third thing is that it happened in Brady's 2 Old North Saros series, was she considered to be concerned with him relationships, particularly with separations or the ending of unions. And you know, if we consider the fact that it happens, as I said, not in the middle of the axis that you have between the south and the north node, the head and the tail of the dragon. It happened close to the south node, which is about release. So quite fascinating, this idea of potentially having to walk away from situations or, you know, people that perhaps hurt or abused us in some way. And the reason I talk about abuse is because Pluto was very strong at this particular eclipse. It was, I don't know if you can see by the chart, but Pluto was actually in opposition to the Sun and the Moon at the time of this particular eclipse. So the energies of Pluto weren't working with the eclipse but almost against it, or kind of causing a polarization. So that's quite interesting, as I say, in terms of the fact that in the current lunar eclipse that we're now coming up to, Pluto is also very strong because it's going to be making a conjunction to Saturn, and also forms part of that stellium that is sitting with the Sun at the time of the eclipse. And then the other thing that's interesting is that this eclipse happens in the same Sabian symbol as the January 10 lunar eclipse, and that's really quite unusual to have 2 eclipses so close together that happen in exactly the same degree. So we're going to have a little bit of a closer look at the meaning of that particular Sabian symbol next, just to sort of drill down and find out, you know, what kind of energy we're dealing with. So the Sabian symbol that rules both the July 2018 solar eclipse and the January 10 lunar eclipse is that of the 21st degree of Cancer, which is a Primadonna singing. Now, at the time of the July 2018 eclipse, I thought that this might revolve around the idea of somebody who is obviously talented and who deserves accolades and appreciation, but who isn't very good at sharing the limelight and can be a bit of a diva. And the way that I see this being kind of playing out for, you know, a lot of people is around issues like emotional drama, attention-seeking behavior, and narcissism. And I don't know about you, but I certainly noticed that during the last eclipse season that the idea of narcissism was particularly prevalent in the media and in sort of on social media. So it's possible that there's overlaps here between those two issues. The other way that, of course, this can play out is the idea of getting recognition for what you do. Also the idea of charisma and presence. You know, are you afraid to actually come into your power and to shine in the world, perhaps because of haters? You know, there's been quite a lot of online abuse and bullying that's again been highlighted by campaigners recently in the last 6 months. And if we think about the involvement of Pluto here, which can be a bully, it's possible that you know, there may be an overlap here. And of course, the other way that this can play out is the idea of masks, because very often, you know, in the theatre and at the opera, people wear masks. So there's the idea of having a stage presence or a persona, and then, you know, being very different, sort of like off stage. So there may be something in that theme that you may want to think about. But I've put a couple of keywords here from Linda Hill's Sabian Oracle that might kickstart your own process and help you kind of draw down as to what this particular eclipse might be bringing out for you at this time. So, as I said before, the July 2018 eclipse has interesting parallels with the January lunar eclipse when it comes to the outer planets, and this is particular to Pluto and Uranus, which interestingly are both planets to do with change. Pluto is often about deep-seated and kind of dramatic or unalterable change, but change which often starts on a hidden level and then is revealed slowly. And then Uranus is often about sudden shifts or kind of radical reforms or radical breaks. You know, Uranus is the planet of divorce. So, you know, those are two signatures that you may want to consider at the time of this eclipse and in the 2 weeks that follow. So Pluto at the July 2018 eclipse was opposite the new moon energy, so the sun and the moon. But here it is with the sun and opposing the moon, and that's something that you might want to consider, because Pluto and the sun together are both quite masculine energies, whereas the moon is very feminine and, you know, is in a very soft and sensitive emotional sign, you know, Cancer, which at heart, underneath the shell, the hard shell, is actually, you know, very sensitive. So it's possible at this time that you could feel a little bit ganged up on, or a member of your family could feel ganged up on or bullied. That's one way that this energy could manifest. Another way is that it's forcing emotional changes or shifts on a family level. So you may find yourself through circumstances, perhaps beyond your control, having to reprioritize. So, for example, if you've been concentrating a lot on family or home relocation, it's possible that now you're forced to focus on your career, perhaps because of shifts that happen there, like a job change, a promotion, that type of thing. That's one way that this could work. And then on the collective level, we've had Pluto in Capricorn since 2008, and here it's been doing a lot to reveal hidden abuse and corruption, criminal activity, within institutions and seemingly respectable pillars of society. So we could see more revelations, you know, when it comes to this particular issue, and given that 2008 coincides with the global financial crisis, you know, we might see some aftershocks from that occurring at this particular time, and they may have links to what happened back in July of 2018. So that's another way that this energy could manifest. And then Uranus has been retrograde for the last couple of months, and as a result it's returned to the position in the zodiac that it was back in July of 2018, which is fascinating. I mean, almost the same degree. So this to me really highlights the idea of, you know, first of all, the degrees, second degree of Taurus. So it's worth looking at your chart to see if you have anything at 2 degrees of fixed signs, which is Taurus, Leo, Scorpio, and Aquarius, to see if anything is activated as a result of this particular energy. And then also cast your mind back to July of 2018 to see what was going on. And to sort of narrow this down a little bit, you might want to have a look and see where Uranus sits in your natal chart. So have a look at what house it's in, what sign it's in, and then what house cusp is ruled by Aquarius, because this will also tell you something about how Uranus energy may be working at this time. But as I say, it's interesting that Uranus is also about change and reforms. So given that it's about to turn retrograde, I mean turn direct, you know, again, it might be saying that areas where you feel have been stuck may now begin to sort of flow again, and you might be able to make the changes that you've been trying to make since July of 2019, when we had the last solar eclipse cycle. The other thing to say is that Uranus in Taurus is calling on us at this time to be quite grounded. You know, Uranus energy by itself can lead to anxiety and to, you know, feeling highly strung. And given how much emotional energy is likely to be around at the lunar eclipse in Cancer, it's possible that you know, you might feel kind of extra anxious. So a good way to get around this is to earth, and also just to unplug from technology a little bit. You know, kind of go analog for a bit, go outside, spend time in nature, walk barefoot, have a salt bath, but just generally unplug so that you can detach a little bit from collective energy, and kind of rebalance and regroup. Yes, I think that would be very sensible at this time. Right, so that in a nutshell is the lunar eclipse in Cancer. I hope you found this forecast useful. It'd be good to get your feedback so that I know what you'd like to hear about in upcoming eclipse forecasts. If you're interested in learning more about this particular eclipse, you might want to view my other videos, which are up on the membership page of my website. From there you can also access previous forecasts, such as the July 2018 eclipse forecast, which is accessible from the eclipse chronology page, or if you haven't already, you can have a listen to your eclipse horoscopes, which are essentially looking at the themes, the upcoming themes for the next 6 months. So not just this particular eclipse, but also the December 26 eclipses. And of course, if you aren't a member already and you'd like to have access to these resources, then please go to astrologysphere.com/subscribe and sign up now. Anyway, all the best for the next couple of weeks. I hope everything goes well for you. I hope you've enjoyed this, and looking forward to catching up with you again at the next new moon at the end of January.